Did you know that over 270,000 people in the UK are homeless right now? That's enough to fill Wembley Stadium 3 times over. And here's the shocking part. You've probably walked past someone today who's struggling without even knowing it. Homelessness is a growing crisis that's hidden in plain sight. But how did we get here? What's really happening? And what can we do about it? Stay with me because, in this video, I'm sharing 10 hard-hitting truths about homelessness in the United Kingdom that everyone needs to hear. Let's get started. Truth number 1. Homelessness isn't just rough sleeping. When most people think of homelessness, their minds immediately jump to the image of someone sleeping on the street, perhaps on a bench, in a doorway, or in a park. This is the face of homelessness that is most visible to the public, and while it is undeniably tragic, it only represents a small fraction of the reality of homelessness in the UK. The truth is that 94% of homeless people in the UK are not sleeping rough. They are what is known as hidden homeless. These individuals are staying temporarily with friends or family, often referred to as sofa surfers, or they are living in overcrowded temporary accommodations like hostels, B&Bs, or short-term private rentals. These temporary living situations often lack stability, privacy, and security, which can create significant stress and hardship. Being hidden homeless is just as dangerous as living on the streets, if not more so. People in temporary housing or couch surfing situations are often forced to deal with the constant uncertainty of not knowing when their host will ask them to leave, which can lead to heightened levels of anxiety and stress. It's an exhausting existence, living day by day without the knowledge of where they will sleep the next night. Many of those who are hidden homeless are also at risk of abuse or exploitation, either by people they're living with or by strangers who might take advantage of their vulnerable position. Moreover, people living in temporary housing or squatting often face issues related to overcrowding. When families are forced to live in one room or in spaces meant for much fewer people, tensions rise. This can lead to further emotional and psychological strain, especially on children who are exposed to these environments. Children are particularly vulnerable, as the instability can affect their education, physical health, and emotional development. Living in an environment where the home is constantly changing means that children don't have a safe, stable space to grow, which could impact them for the rest of their lives. However, hidden homelessness isn't just a temporary issue. It can also become a long-term problem if not addressed. Many of the individuals who find themselves in these situations often struggle to access permanent housing due to a lack of affordable homes or long waiting lists for social housing. This leaves them stuck in an endless cycle of temporary arrangements, constantly moving between locations and enduring poor living conditions. Another reason why hidden homelessness is so dangerous is that it is often invisible. People who are sofa surfing or living in temporary accommodation are often not counted in official homelessness statistics. Because they aren't sleeping rough, they are largely overlooked by both the public and policymakers. This creates a significant blind spot in how society perceives the issue of homelessness, often failing to acknowledge that the crisis is much larger than it appears at first glance. The hidden homeless are also more likely to go without help. Many of them do not seek out services because they are ashamed of their situation or don't feel comfortable asking for assistance. They may feel embarrassed about asking for help from charities or the government because they believe their circumstances aren't bad enough to warrant aid. This lack of access to support systems means they fall further into the cracks of society. And as their circumstances worsen, their chances of finding stable housing grow slimmer. So, while the image of someone sleeping on the streets remains the face of homelessness, we must not forget the millions of people who are hidden homeless. These individuals are suffering in ways that are less visible but no less damaging. The impact of this type of homelessness is long-lasting, affecting not only the individual but entire families, especially children, who grow up in an environment of constant instability and uncertainty. Addressing hidden homelessness should be just as much of a priority as tackling rough sleeping, and we must work to provide safer, more stable housing options for all those affected. Truth number 2. It's a rising problem. Homelessness in the UK is not only a long-standing issue but one that has been growing at an alarming rate in recent years. The homelessness crisis has been exacerbated by a combination of factors, and the statistics paint a dire picture. Over the past year alone, homelessness has surged by 26%, making it one of the fastest-growing social crises in the country. According to Shelter, 1 in every 208 people in England is currently homeless. This represents not just a statistic, but a huge, growing number of real people who are without stable homes. This rise in homelessness is not just about a few individuals falling through the cracks. It's indicative of larger systemic issues in housing, employment, and social safety nets. In many cases, homelessness is the result of a complex set of factors that include the spiraling costs of rent, the lack of affordable housing, rising energy bills, and stagnating wages. These economic pressures are not felt equally across all groups in society, but particularly affect the most vulnerable, low-income individuals, families, and those with mental health issues or disabilities. The increasing rate of homelessness is not just a reflection of the challenges facing people at risk of becoming homeless. It's also a sign that the systems designed to prevent and address homelessness are failing. A lack of affordable housing is one of the primary reasons homelessness is on the rise. Over the past few decades, the UK has seen a steady decrease in the availability of social housing, with fewer homes being built, fewer protections for renters, and a rising reliance on the private rental market, which is often prohibitively expensive for many people. With rising rents and fewer available homes, many people are being pushed out of the rental market and into homelessness. Another factor contributing to the rise in homelessness is the ongoing crisis in the private rental sector. With the end of government subsidies like housing benefit cuts, more and more families are finding it impossible to keep up with rising rents. Many individuals are already living paycheck to paycheck, and the financial burden of rent increases and other costs leaves them with no cushion to absorb unexpected expenses. This, combined with the growing pressure on public housing, means that a significant number of individuals and families find themselves living in temporary accommodations or becoming homeless altogether. The increase in homelessness also reflects a growing divide between the rich and poor in the UK. For those at the bottom of the economic ladder, social mobility is becoming increasingly difficult. The rise of zero-hour contracts and gig economy jobs has made it harder for many people to secure stable, long-term employment with benefits or fair wages. Truth number 3, families are the fastest growing group. When we think of homelessness, we often envision single adults or individuals struggling with addiction or mental health issues. While these are indeed significant contributors to the homelessness crisis, there's a rapidly growing group of homeless people that often gets overlooked: families with children. In fact, families are now the fastest growing group of homeless individuals in the UK. More and more children are being forced to grow up without a permanent home, with over 125,000 children currently living in temporary accommodation. Homelessness among families is particularly troubling because it has long-term consequences for children's well-being. When a child is raised in a homeless environment, their physical, mental, and emotional development is often severely affected. Imagine being a child and waking up every day not knowing where you'll sleep that night or whether you'll have a warm meal. This level of uncertainty can create lasting trauma for children, leading to a range of issues, including anxiety, depression, behavioral problems, and struggles in school. Temporary accommodations, such as hostels or BNBS, are often not equipped to meet the needs of children. These spaces can be overcrowded, unsafe, and unsuitable for family life. Families often live in cramped conditions, sharing rooms with strangers, and lack access to basic amenities like cooking facilities or private bathrooms. The lack of stability and privacy is stressful for children and parents alike. Furthermore, many children in temporary accommodation are unable to attend school regularly, which can lead to learning difficulties and social isolation. The rise of family homelessness is also closely tied to the affordability of housing in the UK. With rent prices continuing to rise and the lack of available affordable housing, many families are simply unable to secure stable homes. Families are also more vulnerable to eviction, as they often rely on private landlords who can terminate leases with little notice. This leaves many families in a constant state of uncertainty, moving from one temporary shelter to the next, unable to settle down. Domestic violence is another significant factor contributing to the increase in homelessness among families. For many women and children fleeing abusive situations, leaving their homes is the only option to escape violence. However, without adequate shelter or support, Many are forced into temporary accommodation, where they remain at risk of further abuse or instability. For many families experiencing homelessness, the problem is compounded by a lack of affordable housing options. They often spend years on waiting lists for social housing, but the availability of homes is limited, and the quality of housing is often poor. This long waiting period means that children grow up in an unstable environment, without the sense of security or permanence that is essential for their development. Addressing family homelessness requires comprehensive solutions that not only provide shelter but also address the root causes of the issue. We need more affordable housing, policies that protect renters, and support systems that can assist families in crisis. Families are the most vulnerable group in the homelessness crisis, and we must prioritize finding solutions that give them the stability and safety they need to thrive. Truth number 4. The cost of living crisis has made it worse. The rising cost of living has significantly worsened the homelessness crisis in the UK. With increasing rent prices, energy bills, and the cost of food, more and more families are finding themselves unable to afford basic necessities, let alone stable housing. The cost of living crisis has left many people one unexpected expense away from losing their homes. For the average household, wages have remained relatively stagnant, while the costs of everyday essentials have skyrocketed. As a result, many people are living paycheck to paycheck, with no cushion to absorb unforeseen expenses. A sudden job loss, medical emergency, or even a small rise in rent can push a family or individual into homelessness. Even those with jobs are finding it increasingly difficult to keep up with living costs, especially in major cities where housing prices are through the roof. The cost of housing is one of the primary drivers of homelessness in the UK. For many individuals and families, rent prices have simply become unaffordable. In many urban areas, the rental market is dominated by private landlords who charge exorbitant rents for substandard properties. The high demand for housing means that renters have little choice but to accept these conditions, and many are left living in overcrowded or unsafe accommodations. At the same time, social housing, once a reliable option for low-income families, has become increasingly scarce. For many people facing homelessness, the lack of affordable housing options means they are left with no choice but to seek temporary shelter or couch surfing, further adding to the hidden homelessness crisis. The scarcity of social housing is exacerbated by cuts to housing benefits and a lack of investment in new housing stock. Energy bills have also risen sharply in recent years, placing additional financial pressure on households. For many people struggling to make ends meet, energy bills are one of the first expenses they cut, even if it means living in cold or uncomfortable conditions. For those who cannot pay, the risk of eviction or having services cut off becomes very real. Food insecurity is also a growing issue. The rising cost of food means that many people are having to choose between eating and paying their rent. This means they may have to resort to food banks or other charitable support just to get by. When people can't even afford food, they are even less likely to be able to pay for housing, making homelessness more likely. The cost of living crisis shows how fragile people's housing situations are, especially those on low incomes. A single unforeseen event can lead to devastating consequences, pushing people into homelessness. It's clear that the rising cost of living is a driving force behind the homelessness crisis, and we need urgent action to address it. Truth number 5. Evictions are driving homelessness. Evictions are one of the leading causes of homelessness in the UK, with many people being forcibly removed from their homes due to rent arrears or disputes with landlords. However, one of the most concerning aspects of the eviction process is the no-fault eviction system in the UK, which allows landlords to evict tenants without needing to provide a specific reason. This type of eviction is known as a Section 21 eviction and is a major contributor to homelessness, especially among families and vulnerable individuals. The Section 21 eviction system is particularly harmful because it offers no protection to tenants who are facing eviction due to circumstances beyond their control. A tenant may be doing everything in their power to pay rent, but if the landlord decides to sell the property or increase rent to an unaffordable level, they can use Section 21 to evict the tenant without having to justify their decision. This means that families and individuals can be forced from their homes with little to no warning, leaving them with nowhere to go. For many tenants, This sudden loss of housing can have a devastating impact. They may not have the financial resources to secure another rental property, especially with rents continuing to rise across the country. Without the right to stay in their homes, tenants are left with very few options, often leading them to temporary accommodation or homelessness. Evictions are not just about the loss of a home, they are also about the loss of stability. For families, the disruption caused by an eviction can be catastrophic. Children may have to leave their schools, people may lose their jobs if they're forced to move far away, and the emotional toll can be overwhelming. Families with young children are particularly vulnerable in these situations, as they may have little support and are often left without any clear path to permanent housing. For individuals facing eviction, the emotional strain can also be profound. Many of those at risk of eviction already struggle with mental health issues, making the stress of eviction even harder to bear. The uncertainty and anxiety that come with the threat of eviction can have long-lasting effects on someone's well-being. In many cases, people facing eviction are unaware of their rights or lack the knowledge of where to seek help. This can leave them even more vulnerable to exploitation or mistreatment during the eviction process. The lack of affordable housing and the rise of private landlords who can evict tenants without consequence make it even harder for renters to secure long-term housing. It's clear that the current eviction system is one of the main drivers of homelessness, and reform is desperately needed. The government must take action to protect renters from unfair evictions and invest in more affordable housing to ensure that tenants have a secure place to live. Truth number 6. Social housing is scarce. The history of social housing in the UK is marked by periods of expansion followed by austerity measures and underinvestment. In the post-war era, social housing was seen as a cornerstone of a fair society, and the government built large numbers of homes to ensure that people had access to affordable and stable living conditions. However, since the 1980s, there has been a marked decline in the construction of new social housing and a significant reduction in the stock available for rent. The sale of council homes through the Right to Buy scheme has further compounded the issue. While the policy initially helped many people become homeowners, it also led to the depletion of the affordable housing stock. Since the homes sold through this scheme were not replaced on a like-for-like basis, there are now fewer available homes for those who need them most. The government's decision to prioritize the private housing market over social housing has left many individuals and families unable to secure stable, affordable accommodation. As demand for social housing has far outstripped supply, waiting lists for public housing have ballooned. Many people can spend years waiting for a suitable property, often living in substandard or overcrowded conditions in the meantime. This chronic shortage of affordable homes pushes people into the private rental sector, where rents are often unaffordable, leaving them vulnerable to eviction and homelessness. The increase in rent prices, particularly in urban areas, is a key driver of homelessness for individuals who once relied on social housing as a safety net. The lack of affordable housing also exacerbates inequalities across the country. In areas where social housing is most needed, such as in large cities, it's increasingly difficult to find affordable accommodation, pushing people into private rentals where they face higher costs and less security. Conversely, rural and less densely populated areas are also facing challenges.